Very well. Good morning, counsel.
Good morning.
Ready to continue your cross-examination of Dr. Miller?
I am, Your Honor.
Very well. Let me remind the witness you are still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
You understand the oath that you took yesterday applies to this testimony as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. Proceed, Mr. Boies.
Good morning, Professor Miller.
Good morning, Mr. Boies.
As a housekeeping matter, Your Honor, I would offer at this time Plaintiff's Exhibit 794A, which was the index of materials relied on by the witness that he circled, those that he identified as his own, and he did not, the ones that he did not circle, those were the ones that were provided by counsel. And then he put question marks about those he didn't know which was which.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well. Let me see if I understand. The circle ones are the ones that he found.
Yes.
The question marks he doesn't remember, and the balance were furnished by counsel.
Yes.
Very well, thank you. The exhibit will be admitted. It's not marked. I'll ask the clerk to so mark it.
I have the original here, Your Honor.
Ah, all right.
Now, at the break, Professor Miller, we were talking about polls, and you said that you might have seen some polls, but you didn't recall. And then I asked you to look at tab 78. Do you recall that?
Yes. I don't think we actually looked at tab 70.
No, I don't think we actually got there.
Okay.
All right. But I asked you to look at it, and I ask you to do it now.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I have it here.
I'm sorry, say again?
I have it in the tab here.
Good. Now, this is the exit polls that were taken following Proposition 8. Have you seen these before?
Yeah, I believe I have seen this as well as a couple other exit polls.
Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 2853.
No objection, Your Honor.
That number again, sir?
2853.
Thank you.
Now, from looking at the exit polls that you looked at, was it clear to you that people who attended church more often were more likely to vote yes on Proposition 8 than other people?
Well, I'm looking at the exhibit
And
here.
my question actually had to do with your state of mind. What was your state of mind? We'll go to the exhibit.
Oh, okay. I think it's fair based on a number of surveys that I've seen. I can't remember whether the Los Angeles Times poll or this poll, post-election analysis by Patrick Egan and Ken Sherrill, all informed my view about this. And I think it is fair to say that those who are more frequent attenders of religious services were more in favor of Proposition 8 than other people by a considerable amount.
And if you turn to page 8, where it talks about vote by church attendance in the middle, do you see that?
Yes.
And it says that the 32% of the population that attended church weekly voted yes on Proposition 8 84% of the time. You see that?
I do see that, yes.
Now, is that consistent with your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it would be 84, but it would be a high percentage. That's consistent.
And everybody else voted no more than anybody else voted yes, correct?
Yeah, it's broken in three categories. The occasional attenders voted no by a narrow margin, and the people who never attended church in this poll was by a large margin.
Now, when you say the people that attended occasionally voted no by a narrow margin, well, they voted no 54% of the time, correct?
54 to 46 is what it says here.
Yes, and that was a margin that was greater than the final margin, right? I mean, in terms of the actual vote?
Well, the final vote was about 52 to 48.
So the answer to my question is yes.
Narrowly, yes. Yes, that's true.
Now, could we put up defendant's demonstrative 25, please? And while we're doing that, Professor Miller,
Yes?
one of the strong allies of the gay and lesbian community that you identified were labor unions, correct?
That's correct.
Now, did you investigate how many members of labor unions actually voted in the Proposition 8 election?
I don't recall if I've looked at exit polls that broke it down by union membership. I don't recall what the vote was.
Well, let's look at page 12 and see if that refreshes your recollection.
All right.
And do you see the third item down that breaks people down on whether they have a union member in the family? in the household?
Yes.
And of those people who had a union member in the household, 56% voted yes, correct?
According to this poll, that is correct.
And do you have any doubt do you have any reason to doubt that?
No, I mean, I don't have any reason to doubt that. I haven't looked at the methodology of this poll, but I don't have any reason to doubt it.
And is it consistent with your understanding that a majority of the people with a union member in the household voted in favor of Proposition 8? Is that consistent with your understanding?
Well, this would be evidence to suggest that that's the case.
Well, do you know any evidence to suggest that that's not the case?
No, I haven't really investigated it closely.
Now, let me ask you to look at demonstrative, this is your demonstrative 25. And this was the list of professional associations that favored gay and lesbian marriage, correct?
I can't remember whether I said it was marriage or LBGT rights.
Well, let me ask
but
you, do these professional associations favor gay and lesbian marriage?
At least some associations within these categories did, yes.
All right. When you were going through this long list of churches and labor unions and professional associations that you said were in favor of gay and lesbians, were you meaning to say that they were in favor of gay and lesbian marriage, or that they were simply in favor of gay and lesbian rights?
I think that most of them that I looked at came from support for the Leno bills in the California legislature, which would have created gender-neutral marriage in California, as well as an amicus briefs in Strauss v. Horton or in remarriage cases, which would have established same-sex marriage in California. So, I mean, those would all have been in the category of supporters of same-sex marriage.
And with respect to these associations, I'm not sure I have your testimony.
Okay.
What is your testimony about these?
I'm confident that there were groups in each of these categories that have supported same-sex marriage.
Okay, well, let's go through the categories. First, psychologists. Have you investigated why psychologists and psychologist associations favor same-sex marriage?
I don't believe I've read any position statements by them on this. I've just seen they're being registered as supporters of the legislation or the litigation.
So, as I understand it, you have seen them be in favor of it, but you haven't investigated why they were in favor of it. Is that fair?
For psychologists, I have not. No.
All right, let's take psychiatrists. Have you investigated why psychiatrists are in favor and why psychiatrist associations are in favor of same-sex marriage?
No, I have not.
Well, let's take something closer to home then. University professors. Have you investigated why university professors and university professors associations are in favor of same-sex marriage?
I would, I think that there's an actual support by the California State Faculty Association. I mean, I haven't read that. I can say, based on my own experience as a university professor and somebody in that arena, that for the most part, I think it would go to the norm of fairness that would be an important consideration for many university professors.
Mm-hmm. Now, legal organizations. Have you investigated why legal organizations support same-sex marriage?
I don't know if I've read any position papers, but again, I would say that it would be probably for the same reason, a commitment to the norm of fairness and equality.
All right, let me ask you to look at tab 103. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Now, this is a Gallup News Service poll dated February 20th, 2007, and this is Defendants Exhibit 271. Have you reviewed this document?
I believe this is one of the polls that I did review, but I can't recall, actually.
Your Honor, I would offer Defendants Exhibit 271.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, 271 is admitted.
Now, this poll on the first and second page talks about a question that was asked during the last presidential election, correct, sir?
I'm just reading the question now. Okay, I have the question here, yes.
And the people were asked whether, if their party nominated a well-qualified person for president, would they vote for that person if that person had certain characteristics, correct?
Yes.
And respondents, 95% of them, said that if a qualified Catholic was nominated, they would vote for them, correct?
Well, that's what the poll says, yes.
Do you have any doubt to doubt these polls?
No.
No. And the poll says that if an African American was nominated who was well qualified, 94% would vote for him or her, correct?
Yes, I see that figure.
And 92% would vote for a qualified Jewish candidate. And 88% would vote for a qualified woman candidate, correct?
I see those figures, yes.
And 87% would vote for a qualified Hispanic candidate, correct?
I see that, yes.
And 72% would vote for a qualified Mormon candidate, correct?
Yes, I see that.
And 67% would vote for a qualified candidate who had been married for the third time. You see that?
Well, that's what the poll says.
Yeah. And 57% would vote for somebody who was 72 years of age if he was well qualified, correct?
Yes.
But only 55% would vote for a well-qualified person who was homosexual, correct?
Yes, I mean, it's very close to the 72-year-old person.
Yeah, and 40 points below a Catholic, right?
According to this poll, yeah.
And 39% below a black or African American, correct?
Yes, and 10% above an atheist.
Yes. So that tells you something about the extent to where there's discrimination and stereotyping and prejudice against homosexuals in the country. Yes or no?
It's a data point. It's a data point.
Is that a yes?
It tells me something. It's one data point that I would want to investigate further.
But you
certainly.
don't have any reason to doubt the results of these, do you?
I haven't looked at the methodology, but I don't have any reason to doubt the findings.
And in your investigation of whether there was prejudice against gays and lesbians and whether gays and lesbians had political power, did you investigate polls like this?
I did look at some polls, yes.
All right, let me turn back to the subject of initiatives and ask you to look at tab 84. And you said that one of the things that you looked at were materials from the Human Rights Campaign. Am I correct about that, sir?
Yes, that's correct.
And this is Plaintiff's Exhibit 2859, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you look at this document from the Human Rights Campaign?
Let me take a look. I may have, I don't recall.
Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 2859.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, 2859 is admitted.
Let me ask you to look at page 5, first paragraph. It says there, a fundamental American value holds that people who do their jobs, pay their taxes, and contribute to their communities should not be singled out for unfair discrimination. But federal law fails to extend this basic fairness to untold millions of Americans who across this country happen to be lesbian or gay. They are fired from their jobs, refused work, paid less, and otherwise discriminated against in the workplace with no protection under the federal law. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And do you have any reason to disagree with that?
Let me just take another look at it, please. Well, I mean, the last sentence beginning with they, I have no idea what they mean, with respect. I mean, the author means with respect to how many. The prior sentence says that untold millions across the country who happen to be lesbian or gay are not covered by federal law for employment discrimination. That's currently the case, at least until the ENDA law is passed by Congress, if so. But there's no indication from this paragraph as to how many are fired from their job on the basis of their sexual orientation.
Okay. Well, then, let's break that up, sir.
Okay.
Okay. First, you do agree that there are some gays and lesbians who are fired from their jobs, refused work, paid less, and otherwise discriminated against in the workplace because of their sexual orientation. Would you agree? You would agree with that, correct?
Well, I have no reason to disagree with that. I expect that is the case,
Okay.
yes.
Well, you not only expect that is the case, but in terms of your investigation of gay and lesbian discrimination and political power, you have found out that that is the case, correct?
Well, I'm aware that there are lawsuits, anti-discrimination suits in many states, and so on that basis, I can say that it is the case that there is discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation in the workplace.
And have you investigated how many gays and lesbians are fired from their jobs, refused work, paid less, and otherwise discriminated against in the workplace simply because they're gay or lesbian? Have you investigated that?
The total number of it? No, I have not.
The approximate number, have you looked at that?
No.
Have
I've
you
not.
tried to find out whether the number is large or small?
Well, I assume it's a substantial number. I haven't looked at the specific numbers.
Okay, let me ask you to turn to the next page. The first paragraph says, anti-gay discrimination in the American workplace knows few bounds. As the 130-plus cases presented here show, anti-gay discrimination occurs in every region of the country, in large cities and small towns, on factory floors, and in restaurant dining rooms. You see that?
I see that, yes.
The first sentence of the next paragraph. Anti-gay discrimination often means enduring daily harassment, including name-calling, humiliation, and physical threats from coworkers and bosses alike. You see that?
I do.
And based on the work you've done, investigating discrimination against gays and lesbians and their political power, did you find that anti-gay discrimination often means enduring daily harassment, name-calling, humiliation, and physical threats from coworkers and bosses alike?
Well, I have no reason to doubt that.
Okay, then let me ask you to look at tab 30.
Okay.
And this is Plaintiff's Exhibit 874, and it's a publication of the California Safe Schools Coalition. Have you seen this document before?
I may have. I don't recall it, actually.
Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 874.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, 874 is in.
And sir, are you familiar with the California Safe School Coalition?
Well, I actually don't recall learning anything about that coalition.
Are you familiar with the 4-H Center for Youth Development at the University of California, Davis?
Again, I don't recall that organization.
Well, this says it's a summary fact sheet from a report by the California Safe School Coalition and the 4-H Center for Youth Development at the University of California, Davis. Do you see that?
Can you direct me to where that is? I'm sorry.
It's right at the top.
34, tab 34?
No, tab 30.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you have tab 30?
I do. So I didn't have that in front of me before.
Uh-huh. Okay. You there?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a publication from the California Safe Schools Coalition, correct?
Correct.
And I know you said you don't remember whether or not you've seen this before, but let me direct your attention to the first page under Key Findings.
Yes.
And the first one says, harassment and bullying based on actual or perceived sexual orientation are pervasive. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right. And the next sentence says, 7.5% of California students reported being harassed on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation. That translates to over 200,000 middle school and high school students harassed every year. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
I don't have any basis for knowing one way or the other.
Did you investigate that as part of what you did?
And what, in terms of harassment in schools?
Yeah.
No, I did not.
No. All right. The next sentence says, harassment based on actual or perceived sexual orientation has dangerous consequences for students. You see that?
I do.
You have any reason to disagree with that?
No.
Okay. Let me turn now to tab 89. And you will recall this is Plaintiff's Exhibit 2864, which was an amicus brief submitted by Professor Exridge, and Kane. You have previously identified.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would like you to direct your attention to page 17. And I want to direct your attention to the material at the very top of page 17. Take a moment, though, to familiar yourself with the context.
Yeah, this will just take a moment.
Right, and when you finish, let me know.
Okay, I've read the paragraph.
Okay? And the portion that I'm interested in is at the top of page 17, where Professors Exridge and Kane say, many prejudiced voters favor any measure that harms or excludes lesbians, gays, men, bisexual, or transgender persons. Even moderate voters are reluctant because of the anti-gay stereotypes, for example, quote, unquote, predatory homosexuals, close quote, to, quote, recruit, close quote, vulnerable children and destroy traditional families that the state long built into the public education and state policy. You see that?
I do.
Do you have any reason to doubt that?
Well, that's a compound sentence, so I would like to break it down.
Okay, well, let's take it piece by piece. First, do you agree that there are anti-gay stereotypes that relate to gays being predatory homosexuals who recruit vulnerable children?
Well, I know at least at some time there have been these stereotypes. I don't know the extent to which, so I believe that those stereotypes do exist, yes.
And have you investigated the extent to which those stereotypes exist?
No, I've not.
And is there also an anti-gay stereotype that homosexuals will destroy traditional families, in your view?
Well,
No, I'm just asking for your
yeah.
view. I'm just asking for your view.
I understand. This is a little bit different than the first one, it seems
No,
to me.
simple question. Do
Well,
you believe,
right.
based on the investigation that you have done, do you believe that...
I believe that there's a view that homosexuals may certainly undermine traditional families.
Okay. Now, do you believe that those anti-gay stereotypes that you have just identified affect some voters and affected some voters who voted in favor of Proposition 8?
Let me go back. I didn't say. I don't think I said the second one was a stereotype. I think I said the second one was, there's a view that homosexuals will undermine if certain events occur with respect to the recognition of same-sex marriage, that would undermine traditional families.
Do you believe, sir, that there's a stereotype leaving same-sex marriage aside, okay? Why don't we just...
Well, I just don't want to.
Well, listen to the question,
conflict.
please, sir.
All right.
All right. Do you believe, leaving same-sex marriage aside, there is a stereotype, using stereotype in the way that you use the term, okay?
Right.
That homosexuals undermine traditional families?
I just don't want to conflate the two.
Nobody's asking you to conflate the two. I'm just asking a simple question.
About same-sex marriage?
No, not about same-sex marriage. I said leaving same-sex marriage aside, okay? Leaving same-sex marriage aside, do you believe there's an anti-gay stereotype that homosexuals undermine traditional families even if we didn't have a same-sex marriage issue? Based on your investigation, do you believe that?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Let's deal with the anti-gay stereotypes that you do know. Stereotypes that there are predatory homosexuals who recruit vulnerable children.
Yes.
Do you think that led somebody, some people, some number of people to vote for Proposition 8?
Possibly so.
Possibly so, sir.
Again, when we talk about the polls on Proposition 8...
I'm not asking for polls. I'm asking for your opinion as an expert. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Okay. You came in here saying you were an expert, and you've done a lot of study of gay and lesbian political power and discrimination against gay and lesbians and whether it was occurring, correct?
Yes.
Now, in connection with that, did you reach a conclusion as to whether anti-gay stereotypes, including anti-gay stereotypes that there were predatory homosexuals recruiting vulnerable children, affected some of the voters who voted in favor of Proposition 8?
Well, my view is that at least some people voted for Proposition 8 on the basis of anti-gay stereotypes and prejudice.
Okay, now what proportion of the people who voted for Proposition 8 did so based on anti-gay stereotypes and prejudice?
Well, that's what I cannot tell you, and I have seen no poll that would give me that information.
And have you done any investigation that would permit you to make any kind of approximation, sir?
No, and I don't know anyone who has.
All right. Well, let me ask you now to turn to tab 82. And this is in the chapter in the book, Dangerous Democracy, that you and Professor Kane wrote.
Yes.
Now, let me ask you to look first at page 50, under the heading Minority Rights.
Yes.
You write, one can also expect the initiative process to produce different outcomes than the legislative process will in the areas of protecting minority rights and promoting minority interest. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And you identify several reasons why that's so, correct?
Just take a minute to read this. Okay.
Okay? Now, if you turn to page 52, and I'm going to ask you about the first full paragraph here.
Yes.
And this refers to a study that you did of what you referred to as the 3 high-use initiative states: Oregon, Colorado, and California, correct?
Yes.
And this was a study that covered the prior 40 years, correct?
Yes, this was a 1999 study I did.
Right, and it covered the 40 years preceding 1999, correct?
It was 1960 to 99, something like that, yes.
39 years.
39 years.
Okay, you described it as covering the past 4 decades, correct?
And let me, yes, that's correct.
All right, let me direct your attention to the middle of that paragraph where you say, the problem, however, do you see that?
Yes.
The problem, however, you write, is that initiatives that directly and differentially affect minorities can easily tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiment in the electorate. The initiatives from the 3 states in this case.
Return the family to Jesus.
Carry on, Mr. Boies.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, you write, the problem, however, is that the initiatives that directly and differentially affect minorities can easily tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiment in the electorate. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And then you go on to say, the initiatives from the 3 states in this category sought to ban efforts to prevent, quote, private, close quote, racial discrimination in housing, restrict busing to desegregate public schools, restrict state efforts to protect the rights of homosexuals, establish English as the state's official language, restrict illegal immigration, ban state affirmative action for women and minorities, and restrict bilingual education. And that was an accurate description of the initiatives that you had studied.
Yes, I also said, though, that these initiatives should not be too easily caricatured as majority efforts to tyrannize minorities.
All right, well, let's just look at that. What you said, you did have, this was not a complete sentence, was it? That you,
some pose that danger, right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You said, these initiatives should not be too easily caricatured as majority efforts to tyrannize minorities, although many of them at least presented that danger. Correct, sir?
Well, that's what the sentence says,
And
yes.
after that, you wrote just what we described. Correct, sir? The problem, however, differentially affects minorities, can easily tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiment in the electorate. You wrote that, correct?
There is an intervening sentence.
Yes, there is. You wrote, the problem, however, is that initiatives, et cetera, correct? And then you give some examples of that. Am I correct?
Yeah, but before that, I wrote, some of the measures, e.g. shifting from a policy of bilingual education, English immersion, arguably represented bona fide, if controversial, efforts to promote the interests of minorities and enjoyed some support in affected minority communities.
Yes, and immediately after that, what you say is that some of the measures represented that. And then you went on to say, the problem, however, and you were talking about the problem with these initiatives, correct, sir?
Yes, I'm wrestling with this question in this paragraph.
Well,
yes.
it was your paragraph, correct, sir?
It was. Well, I mean, I was the co-author. I can't claim it all myself.
No, but you don't reject this, do you?
I do now.
You do now. You do, yes? Testifying as an expert for the defendant, you do now.
No. In my book that I published last year, I have a different analysis of this issue.
No, in your book, you never said this was wrong, did you, sir? That book you published in 2009, you never said this was wrong, did you?
Well, it's a totally different analysis of this issue.
You never said this was wrong, yes or no? Did you ever say this was wrong?
Did I ever say that this prior paragraph was wrong in my book?
Yes.
Well, no. I gave a different analysis.
Did you ever say it was wrong? That's a yes or no question.
Not in those words, no.
Did you ever say it was inaccurate?
Not in those words.
Okay. Now, I'm just asking now for your present view, okay? You were describing in this paragraph the 4-decade study of initiatives in the 3 high-use initiative states. Now, do you believe that your description here is inaccurate as far as that study was concerned?
I think I would cast it somewhat differently.
Well, I'm sure you would, but that's not my question. Okay? You're purporting here
Yes.
to describe the results of a survey that you did, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you believe that you described the results of the survey that you did accurately?
I think incompletely.
Incompletely. Well, let's take it one step at a time. When you say the problem that initiatives directly and differentially can directly and differentially affect minorities, do you believe that's true?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And do you believe that initiatives that directly and differentially affect minorities can easily tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiment in the election? Do you believe that?
I think on occasion that can occur.
Okay. And do you believe that has occurred?
I do.
Okay. And is it the case that you still believe that the initiatives that you studied in this category, let me ask you, when you say the initiatives from these three states in this category, you're talking about the category of initiatives that directly and differentially affect minorities and that tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiment in the electorate, right?
Yes.
All right. And let me give you examples of the initiatives that directly and differentially affect minorities that tap into a strain of anti-minority sentiments. Okay, sir?
Yes,
that's correct.
That's correct.
All right, and the initiative examples that you give of that kind include initiatives to restrict state efforts to protect the rights of homosexuals. Correct?
Among several others.
Yes, among several others. I didn't mean in any way to imply that that was the only minority that was suffering here. Well, then you go on to say, by contrast, no voter-approved initiative in those states during that period of 40 years especially expanded the rights of minorities. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Was that an accurate statement, sir?
I don't have any reason to disagree with that at this point, no.
Okay. Let me ask you to look at page 42, and let me ask you to look at the very last sentence there where you write, initiative government leads to higher level of policy responsiveness to the median statewide voter, but it produces biases against individual and minority rights, precisely what the checks and balances system was meant to protect. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, when you refer to the median statewide voters, what are you referring to?
Well, this is, that's a political science term. If you look at the electorate and you look at the opinion, the public opinion of the electorate on a distribution, the median is it's basically the opinion in the center of that curve.
All right. Well, let's look at next at tab 35. And this is your Santa Clara Law Review article, correct?
Hold on, I'm getting there.
Is this already in evidence?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Yes.
Yes, it is. All right? And I'd like to ask you about some passages here that relate to the same subject that we're talking about, which is the relationship of initiatives to undermining protections for minorities. And I'd like to begin on page 8. The first full paragraph next to the last sentence is what I'm primarily interested in. But for context, the immediately preceding sentence says, first, the process of populist-oriented initiative lawmaking is not necessarily, quote, more democratic, close quote, than the representative system, if one conceives of, quote, democracy, close quote, as not just, quote, majority rule, close quote, but instead a process that includes a range of democratic norms. Then you go on to say, second, the substance of populist-oriented initiative lawmaking tends to undermine representative government and impose majoritarian values at the expense of minority rights. You see that?
I do see that.
And what did you mean in that sentence by majoritarian values?
Well, I assume that what I meant was the viewpoint of the majority of the voters participating in the election.
Now, let me ask you next to look at page 12 of this article at the bottom of the page.
Yes.
There where you write, quote, all of the consequences of the populist triumph, the threats to minority rights, the pressure on the courts, and the undermining of representative governments are disturbing to the commentators from a wide range of political persuasions who admire progressive concept of state government. And when you refer to commentators from a wide range of political persuasions, did you have any particular commentators in mind?
Oh, let me think. certainly most critics of the initiative process today come from the left. Early on in the progressive era, most critics of the initiative process came from the right. For example, William Howard Taft was an early critic of the initiative process. And this is what I've called the Madisonian kind of critique of the initiative process. And this was the framework I was using during this period.
Indeed, if you turn to page 33 of your order,
Well, let's see.
at the bottom of the page, this is at footnote 65, you write, quote, direct democracy's threat to minority rights is, of course, one of the primary reasons Madison and most of the other founding fathers favored a representative system replete with checks and balances. See generally James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and the Papers, the Federalist Papers. And that's what you were referring to a moment ago when you talked about the Madisonian analysis that you were pursuing at this time. Is that correct?
Usually focused on the Federalist Papers, and that's the Madisonian analysis I was using as a critique to pure or direct democracy and the disadvantages of that system during that period of my when I was in graduate school, yes.
Are you familiar with the Federalist Society, sir?
Yes, I am.
And would you consider the Federalist Society, in your terms, a left organization?
No.
Okay. You consider it a right organization, correct, in the left-right spectrum?
I don't know if I'm the real expert on that in the courtroom, but I would say probably no.
You would say probably
So.
Probably so. Okay. Now let me ask you to look at page 11 of this article, and I'm interested in the third sentence of the first full paragraph there. But just so that you have the context, I'll read the first two sentences. You write, with respect to the second substantive concern, minority rights, it is clear that the direct initiative can be and has been used to disadvantage minorities. The checks and balances system of representative government is designed to harmonize minority rule with protection of minority rights.
I think you meant majority rule with minority rights.
Excuse me, I did.
Yeah.
Let me just read that just to be clear, and then let me take them one sentence at a time. First, you write, with respect to the second substantive concern, minority rights, it is clear that the direct initiative can be and has been used to disadvantage minorities. That's what you wrote, correct?
That's correct.
And you believe that today, sir, right?
I do.
And then you write, the checks and balances system of representative government is designed to harmonize majority rule with the protection of minority rights. And you wrote that at the time, correct?
I did.
And you believe that today.
Yes, I do.
And then you write, in contrast, the direct initiative system, by bypassing checks and balances, is weighted heavily towards majority rule at the expense of certain minorities. Racial minorities, illegal minorities, homosexuals, and criminal defendants have all been exposed to the electorate's momentary passions as Californians have adopted a large number of initiatives that represent populist backlash against representatives' government's effort to protect or promote the interest of racial or other minorities. You see that?
I do.
Yeah. And after your references to homosexuals in that statement, you have a footnote 68, correct?
Yes, I do.
Now, if you turn to page 34, you'll see footnote 68, and you say, the recent example is Proposition 22 of 2000. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, was Proposition 22 of 2000, were you saying here that Proposition 22 of 2000 was an example of the direct initiative system bypassing the checks and balances at the expense of certain minorities? Is that what you're saying here?
That's what the footnote indicates.
Yes, okay. So now let me ask you to look at your deposition.
The footnote is factually incorrect, however. It says that Proposition 22 constitutionalizes the state ban on same-sex marriages, which it did not. So I would say that the footnote is both factually and analytically incorrect.
Well, let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. Obviously, Proposition 22 was a statutory,
That's correct.
not a constitutional thing. And you got that wrong, you're saying.
I did.
Okay, but nevertheless, regardless of whether you got it wrong or whether it was a statute or constitutional amendment, what you are saying here is that Proposition 22 was an example of the direct initiative system bypassing checks and balances at the expense of certain minorities. And in this case, the homosexual minority. That's what you're saying here, correct, sir?
That's what I wrote at the time. I no longer believe that.
You no longer believe that. Well, sir, we'll see about that. Look at your deposition, page 162. That's tab 1, page 162, lines 22 to 25.
Almost there. Hold on.
First, your deposition was taken in December of 2009, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and this was after you wrote your book, correct?
Yes.
Your most recent book, the one you've been referring to?
Yes.
Yes, and you were asked, question, do you agree that the direct initiative can be and has been used to disadvantage minorities? Answer, I believe that's a fair interpretation of the history of the initiative process. Did you give that testimony under oath December 9th, 2009?
Yes. And I would say the same thing today.
Thank you. Now let me ask you to turn to tab 80, and this is an article that you wrote in the Seattle University Law Review, and this is Plaintiff's Exhibit 2855, correct, sir?
Tab 8?
That's 80, 80.
Oh, okay. 80, sorry. Okay.
Now, Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 2855.
2856?
No, 2855.
Okay, no objection.
Very well, 2855 is in.
Now, let me ask you to look at the bottom of page 6, and here you write, at times, government's effort to assist minorities has stirred resentment, which in turn has fueled counter efforts to reestablish and reinforce majoritarian interests. At the state level, the initiative process has provided a convenient vehicle for repealing or preempting representative government's efforts to assist minorities. In some states, such as California and Colorado, voters have approved a steady stream of initiatives in recent decades. Nearly all of them have been challenged in court. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And was that based in part on the 4-decade study of initiatives in Oregon, Colorado, and California that you have done, you were previously referred to?
Yes.
And in the next paragraph, and I'm primarily interested in the third sentence, but if you wish, I can read the first 2 sentences for context. Now, the third sentence says, in the American system, courts have long assumed responsibility for protecting racial and certain other discrete and insular minorities, especially when prejudice against them tends seriously to curtail the operation of those political processes ordinarily to be relied on to protect minorities. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then you go on to say, when an initiative affects a minority thus protected, it is predictable that after the election, the measure's opponent will petition the courts to strike it down. This conflict between the initiative system, tendency to produce measures directed at protected minorities, and the court's commitment to strictly scrutinize such measures naturally generates litigation. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, when you refer to the operation of those political processes ordinarily to be relied on to protect minorities, do you see that?
Well, let me take a look again.
It's a sentence where you say,
Yeah.
In the American system, courts have long assumed responsibility for protecting racial and certain other discrete insular minorities, especially when the prejudice against them seriously to curtail the operation of those political processes ordinarily to be relied upon to protect those minorities. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. First question.
Yes.
You see where we are?
Yes, I do now.
All right. Now my question is, when you refer to those political processes ordinarily to be relied on to protect minorities, what political processes are you referring to?
Well, my understanding of this quote coming from, as I recall...
This is a quote that you wrote, right?
Yeah. I'm quoting somebody else, though, which is Justice
Well,
Stone.
you have included
I
a quote
believe.
from Justice Stone within your sentence, correct?
Right, that's correct.
Now, what is your understanding of those political processes ordinarily to be relied on to protect minorities?
Well, I think he's referring to the democratic process.
Which democratic processes?
legislatures. I think that's what he's referring to, is the legislative process.
Okay, now let me ask you to turn and look at tab 35, page 12. And that was accurate in 2001 to say that, and was it accurate in 2001 to say that in California, over the past 4 decades...
Well, I'm sorry. Can you direct me to where you're... I find the sentence. Yeah.
All right?
Okay.
In California, over the past 4 decades, approximately 2/3 of all voter initiatives have been challenged in court. And of those, nearly half have been invalidated in part or in their entirety. Was that an accurate statement, sir?
Well, many of those didn't involve minority rights issues, but that's an accurate statement.
Well, let's go on to what you write here. You say, in California and other states, challenge and invalidation rates vary by subject matter, correct?
That's correct.
Now, which is the point you just made, that some of these related to minority rights and some didn't. And then you go on to say, populist-oriented initiatives that affect unpopular minorities or undermine representative governments are frequently challenged and sometimes invalidated, correct?
That's correct.
And then you say, by contrast, initiatives that seek to protect the environment, a fairly common initiative type, rarely face trouble in the courts, correct?
Correct.
Now, let me ask you to look at tab 80. This is your Seattle Law Review again. You see, again, Plaintiffs Exhibit 2855, and I would like you to look at page 7.
It's too many binders here. Okay, we're at tab 80.
At tab 80, page 7. And this is a passage we've already looked at, but I want to ask you another question in the context of what we've been examining. The very last sentence above the heading, Criminal Justice Initiatives, you write, the conflict between initiative systems' tendency to produce measures directed at protected minorities and the court's commitment to strictly scrutinize such measures naturally generates litigation. You see that?
Yes.
And had you made a study of the context to which initiatives directed at protected minorities had, in fact, been litigated?
Yes.
And based on that study, you believe that the statement was correct, true?
Yes.
And you believe that statement is correct today, correct?
Frequent litigation, yes. In terms of directed at, I'm not sure that I would use that terminology, but affecting, certainly.
And let me ask you to look at tab 82, and this is Plaintiffs Exhibit 2857. It is your chapter in the book Dangerous Democracy. And for present purposes, I want to start on page 53, and it's the sentences right above your heading, Initiative, Politics, and the Courts, you see? And you ask a question there. You ask, quote, what prevents initiatives from unfairly undermining individual rights and altering the constitution structure of government? You see that?
Yes.
And you answer, the courts, correct?
I do.
And that would still be your view.
I believe that the courts have an important role in checking the initiative system. And my view has, it's broadened beyond this, but that statement, I believe, is true.
And indeed, when you have an initiative that's a constitutional amendment, only the courts can prevent that initiative from unfairly undermining individual rights, correct?
Unless it's repealed.
Yes. And while we're on page 53, going down under the heading Judicial Review and the Counter-Majoritarian Difficulty, the third sentence, you say, in exercising judicial review, the court's responsibility is to check majority actions that run counter to constitutional principles, including individual rights, especially those of unpopular minorities. Do you see that?
Yes.
As a political scientist, you would agree with that statement today, correct, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between protecting rights and expanding rights, which is where I get into my, well, you now have the shift in the analysis. But if there's an established right and it's being violated by the initiative process, then I think the courts have a responsibility for checking that.
Right. And when proposition was passed, gays and lesbians had the right in California to marry, sir, correct? Now that's a yes or no question, or you could say, I don't know. But it's a yes or no question. Is it yes, no, or I don't know? sir?
It was a contested question. There was a pending ballot initiative before
At
the
the
court.
time Proposition 8 was passed, in the months of July and August, September, October 2008, did gays and lesbians have the right to marry in California, in your opinion, Dr. Miller? Yes, no, or I don't know?
The court had issued a decision, and they had a right to marry.
So the answer to my
Yes.
question is yes.
Yes, the court had, through that decision, created a right.
Now, just as a matter of understanding your terminology, the difference between protecting rights and expanding rights.
Yes.
Now, okay, did Brown against the Board of Education protect a right or expand a right in your view?
I believe the 14th Amendment
No.
part-
My question, sir, is not what your analysis is, because we could go on all day on some of this. My simple question is, in your view, as a political scientist, did Brown against the Board of Education protect a right or expand a right, as you use those terms?
I believe it was correctly interpreting the 14th Amendment and protecting the right established in the 14th Amendment.
Okay, so you believe that Brown against the Board of Education was not expanding a right. It was protecting a right guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, correct?
That's my view.
All right, now let me ask you to look next at page 55, and I'm going to ask you about a paragraph at the bottom of the page, and
Wait, did you say 55?
tab 82,
Oh, I'm sorry.
the one we're looking at, page 55.
Just 1 second. Yeah.
And the third sentence there says, quote, "In the role of the courts in exercising judicial review, if the role of the courts in exercising judicial review is to act as a
I'm sorry,
filter."
Mr. Boies. I'm not sure where we're at. This is page 55?
Page 55.
Line.
At the bottom of the page, the last paragraph that begins the populist view.
Okay, I have it. Yeah.
All right. It says, "The populist view that judges should be extra deferential to initiatives has much intuitive appeal. However, as Julian Ewell noted, if one accepts the underlying rationale for judicial review, this is in fact 180 degrees off the mark." Do you see that?
I do.
And then you go on to write, "If the role of the courts in exercising judicial review is to act as a filter to protect constitutional principles and minority rights against majoritarian attack, then the courts need to be more vigilant, not less, when reviewing initiatives." You see that?
I do.
And then you go on to give some reasons for that, correct?
Yes.
And one of the reasons, number one, you say in a representative system, the courts are but one of the many institutional checks on majority rule. Whereas in the initiative system, the courts are the only institutional filter, the check of the first and last resort. You see that?
Yes.
Then you go on to say, "As we have argued, it is easier for violations of minority rights or other constitutional norms to emerge from an otherwise unfiltered majoritarian process than one in which there are multiple checks and balances." Do you see that?
Yes.
And you believed that at the time, correct, sir?
Okay, this is a compound now. We've got
All
to
I'm
break it.
asking you is whether you believed it when you wrote it.
Well, which part? The paragraph or the subparagraph?
All of it, sir,
One,
all
or-
of it. Did you believe all of this paragraph at the time that you wrote it?
To an extent. Yeah, this was a co-authored article.
I understand, but you didn't disagree with this, did you, at the time?
I was exploring this idea. I had read this article by Julian Ewell. I wasn't quite sure whether there was merit to it, but the court should use extra... Well, look, you've asked me about the paragraph saying that the court should be more vigilant, not less, in reviewing initiatives. Now, that's a view of some in the academy. Others have the opposite view. That courts should be more deferential to initiatives. And I was exploring the view that they should be more exacting in their review.
Sure, and this is a little bit different than the situation where you say you saw the light and changed your mind. Here, I'm just asking you about what you believed at the time that you wrote this. You don't say here that you're exploring the issue, do you?
No, I don't.
No, and you don't say maybe this is a right and maybe this is wrong. I don't know. You say pretty positively, don't you?
I probably should have phrased it differently, because I don't think I strongly held this view at any time. I think the better view is that the court should exercise the same in terms of, we can talk about sub 1 and those issues, but in terms of judicial review of initiatives, I think the better view is that initiatives should be treated the same as enactments of the legislature.
Well, let's look at number 1.
Okay.
First sentence. In a representative system, the courts are but one of many institutional checks on majority rule. You would agree with that today, correct?
Yes, I do.
And then, whereas in the initiative process, the courts are the only institutional filter, the check of the first and last resort, and in California at least, you would agree with that statement, right? They are.
Yes, but I don't...
No. Okay, if the answer is yes, then we don't have to go into that anymore.
Well, in terms of actually defeating the initiative institutionally, I mean, there are filters in terms of the Attorney General's ballot and summary, and there are other institutional actors that have a role.
Yes,
that
but once the initiative is passed, the only filter is the courts, correct? In California, at least.
Well, unless the initiative by its own terms allows for legislative amendment or repeal.
And Proposition 8 didn't do that, did it?
No, it did not.
No, okay. Then you say in the article it's easier for violation of minority rights or other constitutional norms to emerge from an otherwise unfiltered majoritarian process than one in which there are multiple checks and balances. You see that?
Yes.
Now, first, that is something that you did believe at the time. You wrote it repeatedly in article after article at this time, correct, sir?
At that time, I believed that, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, at that, yeah. I mean, in terms of the standard of judicial review.
Excuse me, what?
In terms of the standard of judicial review in the preceding paragraph.
No, wait a minute, sir, wait a minute. You say here, it is easier for violation of minority rights or other constitutional norms to emerge from an otherwise unfiltered majoritarian process than one in which there are multiple checks and balances. That's what you wrote here, correct?
I'm not contesting that.
And you wrote the substance of that repeatedly, and we've shown you a number of examples of that, correct?
Yes.
And you clearly believe that, correct?
Yes.
Okay, now let me ask you to look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 2856.
That's tab.
I'm sorry, that's at tab 81. And in particular, I want you to look at page 10. This is an article, Anatomy of a Backlash, written by you, correct, sir?
This is a conference paper. It was never published.
This was prepared for delivery at the 2005 annual meeting of the American Political Science Association, correct?
Yes, I've already testified about that.
In fact, this was one of the articles that you testified on direct examination, correct?
Yes.
This was one of the articles that you were listing when you were being qualified as an expert, correct?
That's correct.
And on page 10, you say, and this is line 11, this is 11 lines from the bottom of the page. Okay, it's a sentence that begins, once this majority,
Yes.
and the majority you're referring to there is the majority that passes an initiative, correct?
Yes.
Yes. You say, quote, once this majority embeds its preference in the state constitution, neither the state legislature nor the state court can undo that provision. As a consequence, the federal court provide the only institutional check on the new constitutional provision, correct?
That's correct.
And you believe that when you delivered this paper in 2005, correct?
Yes.
And you believe that today, sir, right?
Well, it depends on the institutional rules
Sir,
of the state.
The state you're talking about here, the state we're talking about through this whole trial is California, correct?
Right. So when
right.
we
Now,
look-
as you know that in California, once an initiative is passed,
Yeah.
once you write here, the federal courts provide the only institutional check on the new state constitutional provision.
The legislature could put something back on the ballot, or the people could, to repeal it.
Yeah, but then again, it has to go back to the same majoritarian group that passed it in the first place, correct?
No, I'd reject that. I mean, it's a different majority in every election. It's a different electorate in every election.
Do the prejudice and stereotypes of that electorate change in your view?
Yes, if you compare all the evidence over time, there's much less stereotyping and prejudice against many minority groups.
And that's true for, in your view, all minority groups, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I think in particular, if you want to look at this Proposition
Do you
22...
remember what my question was, sir?
Yes.
What was my question?
Well, maybe you should re-ask the question.
Is it true of all minority groups
That
in your view
stereotyping and prejudice...
is being reduced?
I'd have to look more closely at that, but in general, I think we have less stereotyping and prejudice in the United States than we used to.
But you recognize there is still stereotyping and prejudice against gays and lesbians today, correct?
I do.
And
I believe that it's less than in the past.
but you don't have any idea how many or what percentage of the voters in favor of Proposition 8 were motivated by stereotypes and prejudice, correct?
That's correct.
Let me turn to the subject of hate crimes legislation. You identified the federal hate crimes law, which you described as the Matthew Shepard law, as an example that you could come up with of a federal law that demonstrated gay and lesbian political power, right?
That was one instance of it. Yes.
Were there other federal laws that were passed that, in your view, demonstrate gay and lesbian political power?
Well, that's the one I examined. I can't think of any other, but there have been
Sir-
executive orders.
Sir, do you understand the question? The question was about laws that were passed. Do you think demonstrate gay and lesbian political power?
Well, that's one that I offered in my report, and I don't have any other.
The only one, correct?
Well, in terms of federal legislation coming out of Congress, yes.
All federal legislation comes out of Congress, correct?
Well, yes. Well, there is also federal regulations.
But all federal legislation comes out of Congress.
That's correct.
And this is the only federal legislation that has been passed that you believe demonstrates the political power of gays and lesbians, correct?
That was the only one I identified.
And it's the only one that you know, correct?
That's correct.
Now, how do you know what the formal name of that legislation was?
The Matthew Shepard bill.
Well, actually, would it refresh your recollection if I told you it was the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd bill?
That's correct.
And do you know who James Byrd, was, right, don't
He
you?
was a victim of a hate crime?
He was an African American, right, sir?
Yes, he was.
And this Matthew Shepard and James Byrd legislation was supported not only by gays and lesbians, but by the African American community and a wide variety of other minorities, correct?
Well, African Americans were already protected under hate crime legislation, though.
This legislation was supported not only by gays and lesbians, but the African American community as well, correct, sir?
There was a coalition that supported this, that's correct.
And indeed, this legislation was something that was valuable not only to gays and lesbians, but to every citizen in the country, correct?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, don't you feel, as an individual citizen, that prohibiting hate crimes benefits you?
Yes, I do.
So this was legislation that benefited every citizen in the country, correct?
And particularly benefited those groups that are targeted for hate crimes.
Yes, but it's also something that you believe the vast majority of Americans believe benefits everybody, correct?
In terms of good public policy?
Yes.
Well, many Americans believe it's a good thing to be able to protect victims of hate crimes, yes. And I agree with that.
All right. And incidentally, you're familiar with Megan's Law, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
And Megan's Law was something that was adopted because Megan, who was a young girl, was kidnapped, raped, and killed, correct?
That's correct.
And Megan's Law enjoyed wide popular support, correct?
I believe that's true, yes.
Right. And you wouldn't view the passage of Megan's Law as demonstrating the political power of children, would you? Or would you? Maybe you would.
I don't know. I mean, I think there was a lot of concern about children. And to the extent that that's manifest in political mobilization and support for children's rights advocates, I mean, I'd have to look. I haven't actually examined it very closely.
So you think this Megan's Law might have been the result of political power of little girls who were raped and killed?
No, I think sympathetic allies.
Sympathetic allies. That was exactly the point I was trying to make. When you have things like hate crimes, that is something that virtually all Americans believe ought to be adopted, correct? We ought to prohibit that. That's a widely held view in this country, right?
It's a widely held view. When you get into the details, there can be reasons for concern.
Well, whether or not there are reasons for concern, you would agree that it is a very widely held view that we ought to prohibit hate crimes, regardless of what the majority is, or of what the minority is.
Well, fighting is often about the details of what the legislation says. But there's a widely held view that we should criminalize hate crimes.
Have you looked at hate crimes in your investigation?
I haven't looked at it in depth, but I am familiar with some statistics about hate crimes, yes.
And where do those statistics come from?
They're FBI statistics. I think I also looked at some from Los Angeles County.
Well, let me show you some documents and see if this is what you looked at. Let me ask you, and to move things along, let me ask you to look at tabs 12, 13, 14, 15, which are respectively plaintiff's exhibits 491, 492, 493, 494. And these are the hate crime statistics from the Uniform Crime Report of the United States Department of Justice for the years 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008.
I'm sorry, can you tell me the tabs again?
Tab 12 through 15.
Okay, thank you.
And were these the statistics that you looked at?
I believe I reviewed these, yes.
And did you discern from this that the second largest minority that was targeted by hate crimes were gays and lesbians?
I need to refresh my memory by looking at the chart.
Well, let me begin with Exhibit 494, which is behind tab 15, which are the hate crime statistics for 2008. They were published November 23rd, 2009.
Okay.
What minority was the most subject to violent hate crimes, if you know?
Was most?
Yeah, let me just ask you, independent of these exhibits.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion as to what minority is the most subject to hate crimes?
I would guess that gays and lesbians are high, racial minorities, and I think those would be the two.
Now, have you investigated that as part of your analysis?
Not closely, no. I mean, I've reviewed some of these reports.
Now, adjusting for the percentage of the population, do you have a judgment as to what minority is the most subject to hate crimes generally?
I would have to take a closer look at it.
And you have not done that.
Well, not in terms of per capita of the population. No. It's also, again, as I said, difficult to know what the actual number of gays and lesbians in the population is.
Oh, well, you have an estimate of that.
I've only derived that from other people's estimates.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Not a very well-formed one, no. But it's somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 5%, but it could go either direction.
Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 491, 492, 493, and 494.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, those exhibits will be admitted.
Now, you said that you thought you looked at some statistics from California or Los Angeles. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And let me ask you to look at Exhibit 675, which is behind tab 100. Exhibit 834, which is behind tab 92. And these relate to hate crimes in California and Los Angeles County, correct?
Yes.
Let's see, we're dealing with,
It's Exhibit 675, which is behind tab 10, tab 100, excuse me, which is hate crimes in California 2007.
tab 100.
Tab 100.
It's not my binder.
Maybe perhaps it is 102 of your binder.
2007?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
I apologize.
102,
Yes, tab 102.
102.
Yes, 102.
102 is 675.
Hate crimes in California 2007.
Right, and tab 92?
Well, tab 92 should be Hate Crime Report 2008 from Los Angeles County Commission on Human Relations.
And I believe it is 834.
Yeah, and I would offer exhibits 675 and 834.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, they're admitted.
Now, were these the documents that you had reviewed?
I believe I did review these, yes.
Now, you described yesterday all the powerful, all in your words, all the powerful political allies that gay and lesbians had in California. You remember that?
Yes.
And nevertheless, you acknowledged that Proposition 8 passed, correct?
I acknowledge that it passed.
And the reason that it passed was of religion, correct?
Well, I don't know if I would agree with that.
You don't?
No.
Okay. First, let's go to your demonstrative number 22. And this demonstrative that's going to be coming up, you talked about the religious groups that supported gays and lesbian rights. Do you recall that generally?
I recall that generally,
And you
yes.
didn't have a chart that described the religious groups that opposed gay and lesbian rights, did you?
That's correct. This is a rebuttal report.
Uh-huh. And on tab, or demonstrative 22, you talk about the California Council of Churches.
Yes.
And you say it represents denominations with more than 1.5 million members, correct?
Yes.
And then you list denominations, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is not an exhaustive list of their membership, but this is some of them.
Now, this is also not a list of churches that support gay marriage, is it?
Well, the organization
sir.
To which the churches belong.
Sir, can I ask you to listen to the question?
Yes.
Do the churches that are listed here support gay marriage?
Some of them do.
And
all of them belong to an organization that promotes it.
some of them don't, correct, sir?
Well, they are still part of this organization, which is advocating on behalf of same-sex marriage. So it's hard to say that they don't support same-sex marriage.
Professor Merley, do churches put out statements about what their position is with respect to same-sex marriage?
The national or international organizations do, yes.
And do you look at those?
I did through the Pew report, yes.
And by looking at those, could you tell that some of the churches listed here do not support same-sex marriage or not?
Some of the national, international organizations do not, on this list, do not. But obviously, the local units of these organizations belong to the California Council of Churches, which opposed Proposition 8.
Sir, do you belong to organizations that have different views than yours, that publish views different than yours?
Yes.
Okay. And so the mere fact that you are a member of an organization that has a view doesn't mean that you have that view, correct?
That's correct.
So the mere fact that these churches are members of the California Council of Churches doesn't mean they all have the same view on same-sex marriage as the California Council of Churches,
Well,
correct?
my view is that
No,
many
no, please just listen to the question. Do you remember the question?
Why don't you restate it, please?
All right. The mere fact that these churches are members of the California Council of Churches does not mean that they share the opinion of the California Council on Churches on same-sex marriage, correct?
The problem is the definition of church, because local units of these churches may well support same-sex marriage, even though the national or international hierarchy does not.
Sir, that may be or may not be so, as you just said. However, my question is, the California Council of Churches has a position on same-sex marriage?
It supports it.
Now, the mere fact that these churches and denominations that you list here are members of the Council of Churches does not mean that they support gay marriage, correct? Because you can be a member of an organization and not necessarily agree with every position that organization takes, correct?
If you strongly disagree, you would probably leave the organization, but I would agree that in at least some form with your statement, yes.
Incidentally, you say there are 1.5 million members of denominations that belong to the Council of Churches, right? How many members of the Catholic Church are there in California?
I don't know if I can recall off the top of my head. I believe, the largest denomination in the state of California.
The largest denomination. And does it have 30% of the electorate?
That sounds about right. That 30% of the electorate identifies. I'm not sure if it's the electorate. I think it's more the population.
30% of the population.
Which is a very different thing.
Well, and actually, you probably ought to use the population because this is 1.5 million members. It's not members of the electorate. It's members of the churches. So if we take a comparable number for Catholics, what's that comparable number?
I'd have to check. I don't know.
Approximately, sir.
Of a third of 36 million.
12 million?
12 million, maybe.
So 1.5 million members of the California Council of Churches, 12 million members of the Catholic Church, correct?
Yes, and I should say for both of these that these numbers are contested because there is difficulty in estimating church membership. Different denominations measure by different means, either by church attendance or by the individual's self-identification. And so with that caveat, I think it's fair to say that there are more Catholics in California than members of these organizations.
You say it's contested. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not approximately 30% of California's population identify as Roman Catholic?
I think identify. I don't know how closely they are connected to the church, whether they attend worship services or but I think about a third identify as Catholic.
And what is the next largest religious group in California?
Category?
Yes.
This is, again, based on, I believe, Pew Research studies. They identify evangelicals as the second largest group. And, evangelicals is a broad category. It's not hierarchy like the Roman Catholic Church.
And what percentage of Californians identify as evangelicals?
I think in these studies, again, where the figures are not
No,
totally clear.
no. I'm asking for your opinion.
My opinion.
In your opinion.
With the caveats that I have given about the difficulty of measurement, I would say about 20%.
That's your best judgment.
That's my best judgment.
Okay, so you got 30% Catholic and 20% evangelical, correct?
In the population.
And that would, if you take your 36 million for the population of California, that's 18 million people, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Now, if you know what the position, do you know what the position is of the Catholic Church with respect to same-sex marriage and homosexuality? Do you know that? You know that, correctly?
Yes, I do.
Now, the Catholic Church condemns homosexuals' acts as serious depravity, correct?
I don't know if I've seen that specific statement. I know they disapprove.
Well, let me ask you to look at Plaintiff's Exhibit 770 behind tab 22. Second page, last paragraph. Your Honor, I would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 770.
No objection, Your Honor.
770 is admitted.
You see at the bottom it says, sacred scripture condemns homosexual acts as a serious depravity.